in an environment of ambiguity, uncertainty, and frequent opacity, the political leadership needs to be provided with comprehensive, complete, and evaluated options on matters of national security. Referred to as a single point advice, this will need multiple inputs from political, military, diplomatic, as well as all the intelligence agencies. Implications of the options under consideration would need to factor the critical social and economic aspects in modern times, and therefore to ensure security, there needs to be an institutionalized approach wherein properly designed institutions of national security with defined roles and responsibilities and a robust mechanism to bring disparate institutions together to be able to work in sync with each other. Now, the Cabinet Committee on Security is actually the key panel that deals with issues related to our national security. Headed by the Prime Minister, it has the Defence, Home, External and Finance Ministers as its members. Therefore, integrated structure for the highest direction on legislation of national interests and issues impinging on national security actually exists in our country. However, almost till the turn of the 21st century, India did not have a fully integrated intelligence and security architecture. This has led to obvious limitations in coping with the growing complexities and demands of the country on the fast-track route of changes in its regional roles and global aspirations. This was sought to be addressed with the creation of the National Security Council, and simultaneously the Office of the National Security Advisor was created. Post the Kargil conflict, based on the recommendations of the Kargil Review Committee, it was decided to go in for a major overhaul of national security apparatus and processes of our decision making. Without going into details, because I think the learned audience here is all aware that we do now have a strategic policy group. We have the National Security Council Secretariat with the National Security Advisory Board providing advice. Then we have the SPG, which is designed to be the key agency to undertake periodic strategic defense reviews and come up with policy options for the NSC. So therefore, we do have HDOs in place, which many people believe that the higher defense organizations or higher strategic direction entities do not exist in our country. I think we are very well placed in this regard. Changes in the strategic environment led to the upgradation in the composition of SPG in 2018, and along with it, the entire supporting structure constituting the NSC and the NSCS. Again, in a significant defense policy reform in 2018, we saw the establishment of the Defense Planning Committee, which leverages cross-governmental body with the objective of enhancing long-term strategizing. In succinct, the higher defense organization in India has been witnessing incremental reforms. Tri-service organizations such as the Headquarters Integrated Defense Staff or the Headquarter IDS, the Strategic Forces Command, the Andaman and Nicobar Command created in the aftermath of Kargil War are already functioning. We have also raised the Cyber Agency and the Special Operations and Space Agencies. A necessity which had been felt for a long time. These are now being settled, and gradually I think we will be upgrading these into a command at some later stage. The need for having a single point military advice to the government on matters of national security by adopting the joint military security model had been raised on multiple occasions, and this finally led to the creation of the Chief of the Defence Staff in December 2019. Now, implicit in the role of the CDS involves the fostering of inter-services jointness in terms of budgeting, equipment purchases, training, joint doctrines, and planning of military operations, which is an imperative for modern warfare. CDS system in India is therefore evolutionary and will progressively adopt more means of integration and joint functioning for an integrated system to finally emerge for our armed forces. The raising of the Department of Military Affairs with the CDS heads with the status of a secretary is a precursor to a more integrated Ministry of Defence with cross-pollination of service officers and civilian bureaucrats within the DoD. Reform and revitalization of defence sector calls for holistic and integrated planning, military modernization, effective force posturing, synergy, with industry and self-reliance. The restructuring of the Ministry of Defense gives us an opportunity to embrace forward-looking strategies to seize and exploit the moment and set in motion a dynamic transformation process that gives us the desired capabilities to prepare, deter, fight, and win wars in an era of high technology warfare characterized by increased lethality, exponential violence, and rapid pace. Here, I would like to highlight that the time has now come for the military to look towards technology because we cannot defend the nation and ensure effective surveillance and intelligence gathering with just human resources. I think time has now come to focus on technology, and I think we need to study in at some length the battles that have been fought in the Nagorno-Karabakh region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This is a battle which has set the stage for how technology can defeat systems which may be far more advanced through cheaper means and with lesser boots on ground. This is something which we have to focus now on, and therefore our focus is now shifting on developing an armed force with technology orientation, focusing more on cyber capabilities, space-based systems, looking at artificial intelligence, looking at robotics, data analysis, what have you. If we do not now imbibe technology, in the long term, we may get left behind, and that may be too late. And therefore, rather than banking completely on human resources for war fighting, we have to adapt ourselves to integrating technology along with human resources, not just for surveillance on our borders, for intelligence gathering, for looking at various issues for logistic support, and finally, of course, for war fighting. Because battles in the future may not necessarily be fought through as attrition battles as we have seen in the past. We may actually find that there may be a lot of fuzziness in the way two countries may come to war, because if the countries are going to exploit their you know their preference for cyber, their preference for space, their preference for artificial intelligence, then nations may not even get to know as to when we are at war with the adversary. And you may find that gradually you have been sucked into a battle. At the same time, in case our adversary conducts cyber attack on us, then are we to respond in the same manner, or can we apply a lethal force? These are issues that we need to address. That will cyber have to be addressed with cyber, or can you go in for use of kinetic force in case there are cyber attacks on your military entities particularly? At the same time, when a nation carries out cyber attacks, there can always be deniability. And therefore, if there is deniability in cyber attacks, how do you then identify the adversary? These are very complex issues which we will have to address, and this can only happen if we stay ahead of the adversary in technology. And therefore, as India transforms into a modern and prosperous nation, security is the perspective to long-term peace, stability, and development. A strategic space that extends from the Persian Gulf in the west to the Straits of Malacca in the east, and from the Central Asian region in the north to near the equator in the south, has been the center of world geopolitics and geostrategic affairs for over 2 decades now, witnessing violent confrontations as also use of coercion and hybrid tactics by some powers to retain a strategic advantage. The processes and structures of the past wars. The keystone to the way forward is jointness, integration, and indeed modernization by imbibing technology in line with the changing security environment and utmost optimization of resources, generating greater combat effectiveness. Toward this, a series of initiatives are being undertaken that will change the way we fight and the way we develop capability, whose aggregate effect would begin to build momentum shortly. The felt need is to transform operations from loosely linked service-dominated operations into fully integrated, mutually supportive joint operations, wherein the full potential of combat power can be extracted. We are moving towards 2 or 3 integrated theatre commands over land, a maritime theatre command, and a national integrated air defense command. Herein, the Chief of Staff Committee with CDS as first among equals concept would be the coordinating agency for allocation of resources based on requirements projected by the theatre commanders. However, as the system matures, the command would flow from the CDS to individual theatre commanders, and the service headquarters would then be primarily responsible for raise, train, and sustain. Now, in doing so, we are going to evolve our own systems. We have studied a large number of Western systems, systems of China, systems that have been adopted in other countries. But I think we are a very unique nation with two neighbors on our north and the west which are belligerent, with a vast Indian Ocean which has also got to be defended by us, along with support that we may get from other nations. But during the times of conflict, I think we will have to learn to stand on our own 2 feet. And therefore, we have to ensure that we integrate all our resources so that the combined strength of our services adds up to greater than the sum of the whole. And this can only happen if we carry out integrated in a compact manner. There is also a need to integrate our armed forces with the other security forces, like the CAPF and other agencies that are operating in the country, which are also very huge in numbers and can add to the capacity building of the armed forces. As far as defense procurements are concerned, efforts towards streamlining the processes and working out most efficient management of the allotted budget are being undertaken. Toward this end, Headquarter IDS has drawn a framework to enhance integration and jointness in our capability planning process. The framework bound process is now being termed as the Integrated Capability Development System, or the ICADS, and will lead up to the formulation of the Integrated Capability Development Plan. So this is a very methodical process that we are evolving. We are quite sure that by the mid of this year, by June, July, we will have the ICAD system in place, and therefore all our capability development will follow a very systematic approach in which the capabilities of all the three services will be taken into consideration, and together we will move forward, and not that one service can move forward on its own because they are faster at the draw. It will not happen that way. The CDS and the headquarter IDS will balance the requirement of the three services and in an integrated manner ensure that all the three services progress based on the requirements of the external as well as internal security threats. The government has also chartered us, that is the headquarter IDS, to ensure that whenever we do the procurements, even the procurements of the other CAPF are integrated along with us. And we are working toward that. And soon we will have an integrated capability development plan, not just for the armed forces, but for the entire security apparatus in the country. This is a work in progress. As far as defense procurements are concerned, efforts toward streamlining the processes and structures for optimum and most efficient management of the allotted budget are being undertaken. We understand the importance of indigenization to achieve self-reliance and equipping our forces. I must acknowledge the commitment of all stakeholders, including the civilian defense industries, which are making adequate headway towards supplementing our modernization efforts. Talking something about diplomacy, I dare say that military diplomacy forms an essential subset of this national endeavor. We understand the importance of leveraging defense diplomacy to build partnerships with friendly foreign nations to create a safe, stable, and favorable external environment in consonance with international law, multilateral treaties, and bilateral mechanisms. Toward this, we are enhancing our footprints in defense diplomacy with suitable accretions in our defense wings of our missions abroad and strengthening their role in defense diplomacy. Our efforts to assist friendly foreign countries in capacity enhancement and capability building to face common security challenges and disaster management will also continue unabated. With our experience, we are now educators and not learners, and this myth must be driven out. Our nation's aspiration of becoming a regional power cannot rely on borrowed strengths. India's wars have to be won with Indian solutions. Indigenization is the way forward, and we are fully committed toward this. The existing segregated nature of defense and commercial industry ecosystem restricts our capabilities and capacities of making defense equipment. Integrating the civil and military technological effort is the way forward towards self-reliance. Cooperation between government and commercial facilities in research and development, manufacturing, maintenance operations, combined production of similar components and subcomponents on same production lines will optimize commercial and defense industrial base to maximize resource utilization and reduce manufacturing and life cycle concept costs of defense equipment. The Indian defense sector is today is at an inflection point and it is indeed poised to take off. The government and the Indian Armed Forces have clearly demonstrated the resolve and commitment to make in India defense initiative. We have already come out with a positive Indianization list of one-of-one items, which will boost Indianization of defense equipment and weapons. The second list of 101 items has also been prepared and will soon be promulgated. So we will soon have over 200 items, which this time also include major subsystems and fully formed systems, which will now be indigenized with preference being given to the civil industry. It now remains for all of us to translate this wonderful opportunity into a tangible success on ground. And we are sanguine that the coming years we shall see our defense industry growing exponentially and contributing to the overall defense preparedness and deliver us with state-of-the-art weapons and equipment, which will be fully made in India. As a country, we have tremendous advantage in terms of a young workforce. However, this workforce is presently largely unskilled. Large-scale technical skilling of this force can provide a major boost to our country's manufacturing industry. But the problem lies in our economy and the size of our economy. Gentlemen, we do talk about a young workforce that we have in our country, but this workforce will also turn old in the next 30 to 40 years. Therefore, it is important for us to become rich if we have to take the benefit of this young workforce. Therefore, I think the focus has to shift towards building our economy and our ecosystem. And finally, talking about civil military infusion, I would say it is imperative to deal dual infrastructure through civil military fusion. We must examine the feasibility of integrating civil military airports to strengthen aviation safety, airspace management and combat support capabilities, satellites for remote sensing and reconnaissance, communications, positioning and navigation must also meet the requirements of the armed forces with desired inbuilt encryptions. Railway wagons and civil truck trailers must be manufactured for dual use capability of transporting heavy military equipment, including armored fighting vehicles. And the focus, therefore, is shifting gradually from not just having military specs for our weapons and equipment and other systems, but having commercial specifications so that items which are in military use can also be of civilian use and civilian use items can also be used by the military. Construction of communication towers and electricity infrastructure along with rail, road, bridges and tunnels in border states must be of specifications that facilitate utilization by the armed forces as well. We must look at civil military convergence on storage and warehousing facilities for our fuel, oil and lubricants, rations and ordnance supplies. Civil military integration in infrastructure development holds the key to whole of nation approach towards national security. India not having a formalized published document on national security strategy does not mean absence of strategic thought or guidance or lack of an institutionalized process on management of national security. Loads of material on the constructs of national security that merit inclusion in a formal document have been articulated in an ends, ways and means blueprint, and takeaways have been factored in our doctrines and policies for arriving at long-term integrated roadmaps for developing capabilities as well as capacities, supporting our security needs and simultaneously increasing our effectiveness. Moving beyond an articulated document, India's engagement in the geostrategic spectrum reflect the fierce reinforcing of the policy of our strategic autonomy by not entering into any stifling military alliance as of now. We have preferred strategic partnerships on equal terms rather than compromising our autonomy on strategic issues by towing the party line of alliances. India has rightly felt that as a developing nation, its priorities and security challenges make it essential that it pursues policies that best suit its long-term interests. Militarily, this has translated into building capabilities over long term with a greater thrust on indigenization, to counter the future threats as well as address the requirements to meet our future aspirations. India today is at the cusp of great opportunities and increased responsibilities. Though these augur unique challenges, yet we stand as a confident, articulate, rising nation, willing to claim a rightful place in the comity of nations and shifting of the global strategic perspective to focus on India. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would say a roadmap for the future is being put in place with time bound milestones that we have set for ourselves. Greater emphasis would now be on advancing jointness and integration across the board so as to develop trust amongst the rank and file and shape congruent perception to jointly operate efficiently and effectively. To conclude, the central theme is to be future ready by balancing preparedness for today's requirements with what we need to do differently to meet tomorrow's challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, with these words and thoughts, I look forward to an engaging evening with you all. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Rawat, for that very comprehensive statement. And there is a large number of issues you have discussed and brought to the notice of this audience. But it's quite clear to me that the winds of change are blowing, and the appointment of the CDS has been a very consequential decision, and the new thinking is now being incorporated in our national security planning. And you have mentioned a large number of initiatives which have already been taken, and ICADS is one of them, which I think will be very, very important. And the progress towards theaterization, I think, will also be a consequential decision. And the fusion of civil and military and adaptation of technologies, I think these are very, very important decisions that have been taken. And of course, this is an evolution. And as you said, the impact will be felt shortly, but I think we seem to be on the track. So thank you very much for sharing this very important assessment that you have made of the national security challenges and how we are meeting. So now I'll open this for discussions. Please put your questions and comments in the chat box. But if some of you want to speak also, that's okay. If I can catch your attention, I'll be able to request you to speak and pose a question. But let me first turn to the chat box, and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash wants to say something. Vishnu? Yes, can't hear you. Unmute, please, unmute. Hello? Vishnu, we can't hear you. Okay, I'll go to the next question till Vishnu sorts out his... Major General Chakravarti, is artificial intelligence and quantum being developed by the armed forces? General Rawat.
We can take 3 questions at a time,
Okay, that's fine. That's okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll go to the next one. Dr. Tyagi, is the current technology mechanism provided by DRDO, ISRO, IITs, NITs, etc. sufficient to adopt to new technologies for defense forces? Or do we need to create new organizations? And one more question I will take. This is from Naval Jagota. What would be the role of AD commander and his deputy? Is the AD commander a functional or an operational assignment?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take on the first three questions. Firstly, talking about artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Well, we have made some headway in artificial intelligence, and all the three services have progressed. I would say, I would say satisfactorily, but I think we are making the headway. Artificial intelligence is no longer just AI in our terms. It has now actually made progress. We are seeing how best to leverage artificial intelligence, firstly in the field of logistics support. Today, as far as our maintenance of our equipment is concerned, we are now employing artificial intelligence to do predictive maintenance. Because what has been happening in the services is, at least I'm talking of the Army and the Air Force, we have a tendency of maintaining very large number of reserves or large quantities of reserves because we believe what happens at the time of combat, there may be failures. You can reduce the requirement of reserves if you predict your failures through artificial intelligence. So rather than waiting for a system to fail, you can carry out some predictive maintenance on that equipment so that your requirement of reserves are curtailed, and at the same time your equipment does not fail on the battlefield when you are in conflict. So I think artificial intelligence is being used for providing maintenance support to the armed forces. Other services individually are using artificial intelligence for their battlefield planning. Air Force, for example, is carrying out artificial intelligence for the manner in which it carries out its configuration of its aircraft for various missions, and a number of other issues that they are looking at. We are looking at artificial intelligence in as far as underwater domain awareness is concerned for the Navy, for looking at the undersea aspects of the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. That way, we find that a large number of issues on artificial intelligence are now making progress. But the way we should have actually progressed, I think we have not done so. We have somehow lagged behind. But I think now an impetus is being given to this, and people have now started understanding the relevance of artificial intelligence. As far as quantum computing is concerned, yes, quantum computing also we are going in gradually. Once again, I wouldn't say we have made satisfactory progress, but the beginning has been made and we are heading in that direction. We've been able to at least collect the data that is required for quantum computing. So the data collection is on, and we are trying to see, to begin with, I would say, yes, quantum computing has started as far as in the medical field we are concerned. We are now carrying out a lot of effort to see how best we can support the medical services through quantum computing, and so on and so forth in various inventory management and all those issues. Quantum computing is gradually finding its way. So to say that technology is really not being utilized or how effective it's being utilized, I think this thing has now set in and we have started moving in the right direction. Now, talking about how the DRDO has fared for ourselves. Well, DRDO, is an organization which was raised after independence, and we did bank on DRDO. But then this was the only organization which was actually given the responsibility of research and development for the defense manufacturing. And then whatever they manufactured normally went to the DPSUs or the ordnance factories. Today we are trying to expand the scope of R&D, and how we are doing it is by collaborating with the academia, collaborating with the industry. We have now started working with the IITs, and especially a particular IIT is being given a particular task to look in one particular direction. For example, IIT Madras is trying to look at hybrid technologies. IIT Kharagpur is trying to look at our communication systems. IIT Kanpur is looking at our communication system. So that way what we are doing is that R&D is now kind of being outsourced even to the IITs. So the academia, the industry and the military interaction has now been fused together to ensure that we look at R&D beyond DRDO. Because while DRDO has done, I would say, fairly commendable effort in as far as missile technology is concerned, in as far as the radar technology is concerned, but I think we've lagged behind in some of the other niche technologies where we should have concentrated our effort. I'm also happy to state that a large number of private industry has also now started investing in R&D, because now that there is hope that there will be defense manufacturing in the private industry, so they have also started now looking into R&D, and we are aware that a large number of such industries have actually invested in this. So I think while DRDO has done its job, not, I would say, completely to our satisfaction, but now with the private industry setting in, with the academia setting in, I think they will also now get an impetus to do better, because now there's going to be competition. And I think it is only competition that helps you to compete and move forward. So long as you are working in isolation and you have no competition, then you do not know where to set your standards because there is no benchmarking of standards. But when you have competition, you have benchmarking of standards and you are expected to do better than the other. So that I think will set the ball rolling and we will do better in the field of R&D. Now, as far as the AD and AD commander are concerned, yes, we are, see what has happened is AD has always, air defense was always the responsibility of the Air Force. It is not something new that the Air Force is being assigned. But I think the airspace management has now become more complicated because of the users of the Air Force, of the airspace. Today, it is not just the aircraft, civilian, military that is using the airspace. Today, there are going to be unmanned systems. There are going to be drones. Today, the kind of fires that are being executed by the artillery, by the missiles, which also use the airspace. So it is all becoming a very complex environment, and therefore you need one agency to coordinate all the users of the airspace. And we have decided to therefore create an air defense command. Why we have called it defenses? Because first you have to look at the airspace within your country. When you go across the borders, the air defense command will no longer be responsible. The forces which are going across will carry out their own air defense and they will be given the air defense resources to look after their air defense. Of course, the offensive air support will always be available to them. But this is just trying to ensure that all the air defense resources get integrated. Now, I would like to highlight here that the Army has its own air defense today, the Navy has its own air defense, and the Air Force has its own air defense. And I dare say the air defense of the Army, Navy, and Air Force do not talk to each other today because we are using different algorithms. We are using different systems for our communication. Who's going to integrate this? You need one agency to integrate. At the same time, when the Air Force is carrying out aerial combat, you will have to silence the artillery and the missiles from operating in the same airspace or the same corridors in which the Air Force is operating. Who's going to control this? There has to be one agency controlling it. So it will be the Air Defense Command will be controlling it. So yes, Air Defense Commander will have operational responsibilities. Now, I know the issue that will come up is how is he going to be resourced? Well, he will be resourced by the Chief of the Air Staff and the Chief of Staff Committee. Resources, allocation and reallocation of resources in a battlefield environment is a thing that happens. We do it in the Army, does it in the case of artillery. We do allocate and reallocate artillery resources depending on where the threat is evolving. And that is how the air defense resources will get allocated or reallocated. But what is important is that all the radar systems that we have in the Army, Navy, and Air Force will now get integrated. As of now, the Army is using its radar systems for its own air defense. The Air Force carries out its own air defense through its own radars. So you've got large amount of redundancy that is set in. Now, therefore, to avoid this kind of redundancy and to ensure that you have optimum utilization of the resources, we are going in for an air defense command where you'll have an air defense commander and his deputy will be supporting him. He will finally, of course, be reporting to the Chief of the Air Staff, who is member of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. So any war fighting that is being done, the decisions are taken at the Chiefs of Staff Committee level, which has a permanent chairman Chief of Staff now, which is the CDS. So from there, the direction will flow, the operational directive and the strategic direction will flow from there, and the air defense umbrella will be formed for the country.
Okay, thank you. I think Vishnu is back. Master Vishnu Prakash, would you like to?
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible
Yes,
now?
yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. General, first of all, thank you for your very thoughtful...
Little bit louder, can't hear you properly.
I can hear you. Continue, sir.
Oh.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your very upbeat and thoughtful address. And I'm very happy that there are plans to induct high technology. It so happens, General, that just about 2 hours ago, there was a similar discussion at ICS, Institute of Chinese Studies, and some very well-known colleagues from the armed forces were speaking, who were at pains to say, talk about the capability gap between India and China and emphasize that the capabilities are growing, the gap is growing. Now, what I wanted to ask was, given our resource constraints, I know that we are doing the very best. I know we are improving in.
You lost him. He was talking about the...
I got his question, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Technology difference, yes.
So we'll take 1 or 2 more questions.
Like I mentioned, we'll be doing that by the end of this year.
Okay, so there's one more question. The challenges highlighted by other services towards theaterization and the manner of mitigating them, if any. That's one more question. And another third question we can take in this round is whether civil graduate students interested in strategic and security domain can be educated at PG and further levels at the prestigious institution of the MOD, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about the capability and the differential between India and China. As I said, we have been little slow on the start, and therefore, over the years, a capability differential has come in. China has been able to invest a lot of funds and allocated a lot of funds in ensuring that they imbibe technology. They have sent their people abroad to various Western nations to study their technologies, and therefore they've been able to imbibe some technology, and therefore they certainly have a lead over us. But let me tell you one thing, that while they have a lead over us, we are also evolving technologies to make sure that we come at par with them. But most important, where the biggest differential lies in the field of cyber. We know that China is capable of launching cyber attacks on us, and that he can disrupt a large amount of our systems. So what we are trying to do is to create a system in which we ensure cyber defense. And we have been able to therefore create a cyber agency, which is our own agency within the armed forces. Each service also has its own cyber agencies to ensure that even if we come under a cyber attack, the downtime and the effect of the cyber attack does not last long. We should be able to overcome that cyber attack and continue with our systems either through an alternate means or preventive means through firewalls. So while we are trying to create firewalls for cyber attacks, yet we are quite sure that they will be able to break through the cyber walls and firewalls, and we will have cyber attacks. But then what we are trying to do is how long will your system be down, and how will you be able to operate through that phase of cyber attack that you have been put through. That is one thing which is we are looking at and addressing in a very serious manner. But to say that there is no technology difference, I would hesitate to say that there is a technology difference between us and China, which we have to overcome. And we can overcome this only if we, I dare say, integrate the resources of the three services. Because I find that the three services are at different levels in as far as our technology orientation is concerned. And I would unhesitatingly say that the Navy is far ahead of the Army and Air Force in as far as the way they have imbibed technology. If you integrate, you will at least be able to catch up with them. And that is the way forward. So while we are behind China, we have to, I think, seriously look at catching up with China on technology. We may not be able to fully catch up with China, but therefore we are trying to develop some kind of a relationship with Western nations and to see how better we can get some support from them during peacetime at least, which will help us to overcome this deficiency that we have as of time. Now, as far as the challenges of theaterization are concerned, well, as I mentioned, there is always a hesitation to change because we are a status quoist nation. We believe in status quo. Also, there is a feeling amongst the three services that Army, being a very large service compared to the Navy and Air Force, will possibly, usurp the two entities and possibly everything will become Army centric. I think this is a misnomer because the Army, Navy, and Air Force have their own specialities. They have their own role and task cut out for themselves. So they will retain their autonomy. Integration will only ensure that we have systems which at least operate together. Today, we are not even operating together. Our systems are not talking to each other. Let me now tell you, the Army operates in a communication system called the ASCON. The Air Force operates on AFNet, and the Navy operates on Noon. And these three systems don't even, as of now, talk to each other. At least to integrate, we have to come on a common platform for communication. And only once you have a common system of communication can other things happen. So I think it is very important for us to integrate, and anybody who thinks that integration will lead to one service overtaking the other or usurping the other, I think need to shed this misinformation or misnomer. The other thing that we are doing is we are trying to ensure that we work in a collaborative manner. After a long time, I think there has been a semblance within the services that we need to integrate. And it was 2 years ago that the three service chiefs have actually given in writing to the government that we want an integrated system to come in. And that is how actually the CDS came into being. I think, these are fears that are being compounded amongst various quarters, because some people are saying that, if some of the air defense resources of the army go into the air force, are they going to wear blues or OGs? I mean, these are issues which should not affect integration. These are very minor issues. I mean, whether a person wears a blue or a person wears a OG, is that how we are going to look at our combat capability developing? Let me tell you one thing. The army has been providing communication to the air force. We had a concept called air formation signal regiments. These were army units in OGs providing communication to the air force. Last year, we have surrendered these units from the army and they have all become air force units, because the communication to a particular service is provided by the supported arm to the supporting arm. It is not the other way around. So there is no reason why communication to the Air Force should be provided by the Army. The Air Force should be providing communication to the Army. So we have given the units to them. Are they wearing blues? No, they continue to wear blues, greens, because they operate in an environment where they have to wear the greens, but they are now under the Air Force. So I think these small issues are hiccups which people are trying to, come out with, to say, how will it happen? What dress will I wear? I think these are things we have to overcome. We have to integrate. Integration is beyond the color of our dress. It is maroon. And the last issue was, as far as education of the civil students are concerned, well, our basic issue is, yes, we are now getting the academia on board with us. We are conducting, a lot of joint lectures, joint talks are being held. But more important is we are looking at the creation of the National Defense University. Once the National Defense University gets created, I think the civil military fusion that we are looking at, right from the grassroots level. It is not a top-down approach. It has to be a grassroots level approach. So today, if there is the academia which wants to integrate with the defense services, it has to be through the National Defense University, where the civilian students come and understand the army systems, and they are able to then go back to the field and carry out research and development after understanding the requirements of the defense services. At the same time, in the meantime, what we have done is we have opened our training centers, our forward locations to the academia. Today, there are IIT people who are sitting on the line of control, looking at the manner in which we are integrating our surveillance resources, because we are trying to do it through a system called Jugaad. But there are these IIT people sitting there who are ensuring that these Jugaads become a reality. Our young officers, our men on the ground are very capable people. They understand the requirement. Now, this understanding of the requirement has to be understood by the academia, who have to translate this into a development of a system. And that is how it is happening. We have allowed the academia to go to our training centers where we've got cut models of our equipment. We've got cut models of our ammunition. So the industry which is now going to manufacture our ammunition within the country can go and see this ammunition, see these systems, so that they are able to develop these systems through the private industry. So I think, I would say the fusion between the civilian academia and the military is something which is ongoing at a rather rapid pace. I hope that is the question that was needed to be addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There is a question from Mr. Anil Devli. He asked, does a healthy and robust mercantile marine fleet figure in the integrated capability development plan? So that's one question. And then we have Dr. Gulshan Rai. He refers to some statement of yours in Times of India relating to reduction in defense forces. He feels that a country has to go far in developing and embracing technology. AI is merely a jargon in the country today. What are your comments? And the third one is from Mr. Keshav Bharadwaj. One suggestion is to establish chairs of Army, Navy, and Air Force at each of our central universities. Do you have any comments on that? We will take these three and then we'll go to the other set.
Talking about capability development, the ICAT system that we are evolving is looking at the capability development of the three services. Now, talking about the merchant shipping, whether we are also looking at that as part of our capability development, the answer is no. But it does not mean that the merchant shipping is not being looked at the entire framework. We are now creating a National Maritime Commission, which is going to be looked at by the armed forces and the Navy in particular. And that is why this, when we are looking at the maritime command coming up, the maritime forces, the shipping, the fisheries, and the hydrographic surveys, all this will be controlled by the National Maritime Foundation. We are looking at a agency being created under the Navy. We already have a fusion center in Gurgaon, but this is going to become a more elaborate center where the National Maritime Commission is now moving rather fast. And we will soon have this, which will integrate all the users of the anything that is operating on the coastline or on the high seas. As far as the merchant shipping is concerned, merchant shipping is quite independent, but ensuring that the merchant shipping remains protected during times of conflict, that those are being addressed by the Navy. To that extent, yes, we are trying to integrate the merchant shipping into our system to ensure that our ships are protected during times of conflict without actually diverting our main effort from the conflict zone. So that is being done. But let me also tell you that all the import that we do of whatever happens through the sea, only 12% of the ships that we are using are our own ships of the Shipping Corporation of India. Balance of the ships that we are using is all foreign flag flyers. So really speaking, all the products that are coming in and being imported are not through our own shipping. Our own actually merchant shipping is a very small fleet. Only 12% of that is adding to our import. Rest is all coming through foreign merchant vessels. Now, reduction in the defense forces. Today the army stands at 12.8 lakhs for the what we call as the composite table 1 manpower, and we have nearly 2 lakhs people, which forms the composite 2 manpower. Composite 2 manpower is what we have in the Rashtriya Rifles, the Assam Rifles, the NCC, the BRO, and all the other deputation agencies. So we are over 14 lakhs in the army, and when you look at the entire armed forces, we cross about 16 lakhs. That is where we stand today. And gradually we have more requirements. We are still evolving. As I said, you got to develop your cyber agency, you got to develop artificial intelligence, you are looking at space agency being formed, you are looking at long range vectors coming into the armed forces. So there's a lot which is happening. Our Air Force is still generating resources, our Navy is still expanding. So you find that there is still a large requirement of manpower. Now, if you're going to keep increasing your manpower, then you can have a very large standing army, but that's it. That standing army has to be capable of defending your borders from the adversary. And therefore, what we are trying to say is, if you are going to get technology, then when you invite technology, technology must support the people with the boots on ground. You will require manpower, of course, to defend your borders, but to carry out surveillance on the borders, you can use technology supported by manpower. It need not be completely dependent on human resources. So I think that is where we are trying to address that wherever technology infusion is coming in, you have to now see how best you can do it with other resources. At the same time, I look at a very tactical level. At a tactical level, we have a company and a battalion. Now, a company and a battalion is assigned a particular, landmass to defend. In the mountains, we give it so much area, and in the deserts, we give them a particular area. Today, your weapon systems have become lethal. Your surveillance systems have become more effective. You can now carry out surveillance over larger ranges. You have better systems in the same company and a battalion, which are more lethal. Now, with these kind of systems available to you, can the same company and the same battalion now be given a larger area to defend? Because it has better surveillance capability, it has better weapon systems to engage the adversary at much longer ranges. So if you can defend the same sector with a lesser force, obviously your requirement of the manpower to defend your borders will come down. Therefore, if you start relying on technology and firepower to defend yourself, further we have to be concerned about how the future battles will be fought. Future battles may not be attrition battles in the way we've seen in the past. Future battles may be more technology oriented. As I said, the adversary may actually launch cyber attacks on you. You may face attacks of a different kind. There may be hybrid warfare, gray zone warfare. You may find drones and unmanned systems coming you, engaging your depth areas first. So while we may be getting concerned about the forward areas, we may actually find the depth areas getting into battle faster. And then the concept of when a nation is at war may be difficult, because if an adversary is going to launch a cyber war on you with no signatures of whether it is being done by a combatant or a non-combatant, we will not even know that we are at war, or are we still waiting for war to happen, or when are we going to be at war? You may actually be at war without knowing that you are at war. So you have to be prepared for combat at all times, and to have a prepared armed force which is ready for combat at all times, you have to firstly have your surveillance capabilities, your electronic warfare capabilities, which will help you to identify that there is some kind of an attack happening on you which may not be kinetic in nature. I think for that, it is important to ensure that you mix technology with human resources. And therefore, if you want to get more technology, you obviously have to shed some manpower. That is what we are looking at. Now, the other issue is, this I have already answered. No, other thing came up about, how are we using artificial intelligence, and whether artificial intelligence is only semantics or only alphabets on paper. I've answered this question. We have made reasonably good progress in artificial intelligence, and I think that is the way forward. We have realized the relevance of artificial intelligence, and we are indeed moving forward in that direction. Oh, yes. Talking about the chairs of excellence, let me tell you, these are directions which have come to us from the PMO as well, that we must institute chairs of excellence as much as possible in the universities. And this is something which is happening. Actually, what we have been told is that our senior leadership, in their names, if we can start chairs of excellence, and therefore we have started this. The Air Force already has an Arjan Singh chair of excellence. We are now looking at Sundarji chair of excellence and other things that are happening. These things are already there. BC Joshi chair of excellence, Karyapa chair of excellence, Manekshaw chair of excellence. So in front of it, for the senior leadership that we have had in the armed forces, who have actually brought the armed forces to the level that we are today because of their professionalism and the way they nurtured this armed forces to come up to this very professional level. We are now increasing the chairs of excellence, and that is the way forward. This again will ensure that there is better interaction with the student community between the armed forces and the academia. And last was.
Okay. Yeah, you have answered. So I'll take out of the several questions here, I just want to take a couple more. One is the question of CapEx budget, which has seemed to be low. So what is your view on that? That is one. And the second one is whether we need a professional defense procurement agency. That is the second one. And the third one is about the participation of women in national security, particularly the armed forces. Kindly unmute.
Firstly, talking about the capital budget. Well, let me tell you, our requirement of capital budget is indeed large. If we just look at the acceptance of necessity which has been given to us by the DAC, Defense Acquisition Council, over the last 5 years, the requirement is huge. But what has happened is a large amount of those systems for which we have already taken the acceptance of necessity have actually become redundant. But we have not taken that out of our system. We are still looking at procuring items which have become redundant. If we are saying if we have to start looking at technology, and therefore I think this ICADS plan that we are working, we are going to rework the priorities for the three services to make sure that we are able to meet the requirement. As far as the budgetary requirements are concerned, we have been talking to the government that this is the requirement, and the government has helped us in some way, in the sense that we are now going to get a non-lapsable budget. That means the budget will not lapse, and that there will be no hurry to finish the budget at the end of the year, because what happens is at the end of the financial year, the tendency to use up the money that you have with whatever you can lay your hands on leads to actually purchase of items or procurement of items which may not be your priority one items. But just to get the budget moving, and to make sure that the budget does not lapse, the tendency to see whatever is easy to grab, you grab. So now with this non-lapsable budget system that the government has evolved, this will not be there, and we'll be able to ensure that our capital budget, whatever it is available, is better utilized. The next thing is that How are we prioritizing our things? We are prioritizing our things by making sure that it is not one single service which can take the cake and drive home whatever they want. We are making sure that everybody develops their capabilities depending on the threat levels. Where is the threat today? And therefore, which service or what capability should we develop? That is how we are looking at our budget. But to say that the budget will always be adequate, it will never be adequate. Because the requirement and demands of the armed forces will always keep on increasing. Therefore, what do we do? One of the answers is that we have told the government that we are going to go in for some manpower saving because of technology, but whatever we save in the manpower must be cycled back to us in terms of the monetary resources being made available for our capital acquisitions. That is one of the ways. Second thing is there are other means being found. In fact, the 15th Finance Commission, which was led by Mr. N.K. Singh, had a large number of meetings with us. In fact, they even visited forward areas and tried to understand what has happened. So, in the 15th Finance Commission report, they have also recommended certain issues on how the defense can be supported. Now, in that, defense means he's also looking at the paramilitary forces and the police forces being supported. So there is a kind of a kitty being created, which will not only be available to the armed forces, but also to the settled paramilitary forces and to the state police forces, because everybody needs to modernize. And as I said, the settled armed police forces and the police forces will act as force multipliers for the armed forces in times of combat. Otherwise, we will have to divert a large amount of our own resources for our rear area security. But if we are able to empower the CAPF and the state police forces, we can utilize them for our rear area security and make sure that the entire might of the armed forces available to address the adversary on the front line. As far as women are concerned, well, we have introduced women from the early 90s. As far as the medical corps was concerned, they have always been there. And we find there is suitability of women because there are some tasks which are better performed by women. For example, when we look at cyber, when we look at artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all these issues, where you need a little bit of concentration and the ability to sit long hours on the desk, we have found that the women workforce are better capable than the men folk. The concentration of the women on a computer screen or sitting on the chair is much better than the men folk. So somewhere the women have shown better capability. There are some areas where the men folk have better capability. I think we have to exploit the capabilities of both the workforce of the men and women and ensure that we utilize them for whatever they are best suited for. And that is the way forward. Today, the Air Force has allowed them to fly fighter planes and transport aircraft. The Navy is now allowing them to also fly in helicopters. The Army is inducting women into flying helicopters. So you will gradually find as this women force is evolving and where we find the utility, wherever we find their capabilities can be best exploited, we will utilize the women force to an extent. We have now also made sure that the women are also available in lower ranks. We find that we needed military police because a large number of areas where we conduct operations, counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations, when you go for a search of a house, where there are women folk, you need women police along with you. Otherwise, you have allegations coming of various kinds, which you have to answer later on. Or women force come and stop your operations or prevent you from conducting your operations. So you need a women police force. We have created that force and the first batch will be graduating very soon. Once it is there, then we find gradually maybe in the clerical cadre. In the army headquarters, we do have the AFHQ cadre where we have a women force working with us. So maybe in some of our static headquarters, we can induct women force in larger numbers than what they are today. So women force will be there. They will be assigned some leadership roles. They are being assigned leadership roles as of now in the medical corps.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left and there are a few questions. I'm not sure I can take all of them, but let me just take a few. And one question is, how do you see situation in Afghanistan? Also, do you think the Quad should have a military dimension? So that's from Vion Siddhant Sibal. And then I will request Shri Shekhar Dutt to make his brief comment and Ambassador Suresh Goyal. And then perhaps we'll have to talk at that. So, Shekhar Dutt ji, would you like to make a brief comment?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. Excellent discussion going on with you. I was talking of, there are a large number of equipment in all the three services which are
Sorry, we can't hear you properly.
Oh,
There's some video
I
issue.
was saying that,
Audio issue.
can you hear
Yeah.
now?
हाँ जरा कहीं आवाज तो आ रही है बट कि साफ नहीं है.
अच्छा, अभी आ रहा है?
हाँ अब ठीक है.
Okay. So I was saying that there are a large number of equipment which are commonly held by Army, Navy, and Air Force, and therefore those equipment and therefore different kind of thing like radars or equipment even like MiG-29s being held by Navy and Air Force. So this kind of holding of this thing could be uh, and requires maintenance. Maintenance can it be done jointly? And then the next question is, with this itself, that are you thinking of setting up a joint cadre of consisting of each of all the three services at a operational level? That means where you will require joint operations and therefore joint cadre at operational levels at a junior level, and where they grow into the joint wing itself. So their future depends upon how they perform in the joint cadre itself. Are you thinking of that kind of a thing like some countries? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the question. General Rawat, did you get the question? Or maybe he can write it in the chat box and then we can address it. Okay. Kindly write it in the chat box. I really don't understand the question.
I could pick up
Suresh?
something on joint logistics, joint maintenance.
Okay,
That much
okay.
I could pick up, so I'll answer all that.
Okay. So that's then Suresh, go ahead. Suresh? I think he's not there probably. What, I can't. Please go ahead. Very bad audio.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Please go ahead.
All right.
Lower the volume.
Can I? Okay.
Yep. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
General Rawat, recently the Prime Minister mentioned about indigenization. How should the armed forces understand this? That the armed forces should enhance indigenization of national security system and doctrines. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Satish Chandra.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First, I'd just like to thank the Chief for a very comprehensive expose, and I think you were absolutely spot on the various issues you spoke of, particularly integration, jointness, the importance of technology, and so forth. I was delighted with the government's decision to create the CDS, though this has come 2 decades too late. It should have come much earlier when one was heading the NSCS. And I think it's important to note that it was long felt that the sine qua non for effective higher defense management was the CDS. And in fact, this was the brainchild of Mr. Arun Singh, who headed the task force on higher defense management, which was approved by the group of ministers in 2001. But there were a number of other decisions also taken at that point. And while you were speaking, I noted that some of them were mentioned, which also haven't come into being, like the National Maritime Commission. This was something which the NSCS, when I was its chief, also pushed for. Also increasing the Indian Merchant Navy fleet tremendously, because it was recognized that this was not a good thing, that it should be so low as it was. None of this happened, but I'm glad that it has started to happen. And I think particularly if we can have the National Maritime Commission, this would also be a great help for the reasons you cited. Now, my 3 specific points that I had to make. Number one is you had mentioned about, and I was glad you stated that, and I didn't know this, that the CEDS, the institution, will also see the proper arming and development of the paramilitary forces, which are over 1 million also. And I think that is important. But is there any thought also being given by you to ensure that in internal insurgency exercises, the role presently being performed by the army is removed and given to the paramilitaries, because I think the army suffers a great deal from this. Ideally, these operations should be done by paramilitary, and I'm speaking specifically on Kashmir. The other point, which at the time, which is 2001 to 5 and so on, when I was in NSCS, a major problem I noticed was the point that the DIA was not able to function effectively as the lead intelligence agency for the armed forces. I hope something is being done in that area. And finally, cyber security. The director VIF had a lot to do about this 20 years ago, because he is the author of our report from the NSCS on cyber security. But another thing which we projected, which didn't carry on, was cyber offense. And you referred to cyber security. I do hope that some thought and some action is also being undertaken in the area of offensive cyber operations. These are essential if required. Thank you very much.
Thank you. General Rawat.
So firstly, talking about the situation in Afghanistan, well, we have seen that Taliban is trying to make inroads and trying to put pressure on the Americans to say that they get what they wish to achieve. So there is a lot of fighting that is going on. Both sides are losing. But the security forces in Afghanistan are trying to combat the Taliban, but Taliban are gradually gaining ground, and our large swathes are coming under their control. Now, with that, I think we've just heard the Americans saying that they may be there for longer. But the moment the Americans have said that they will be there for longer, obviously the Taliban has increased the offensive because they want the Americans out. And who wants the Americans out is something also we know in the international community. Who wants to then step in? Now, we are watching from close quarters because we have a lot of stake in Afghanistan. And we do understand the relevance of Afghanistan as far as it is concerned about our own security. We are watching the situation very carefully. And let me tell you that the moves are being made in the right direction. I won't like to openly speak about what is being done, but let me tell you that we are keeping our eyes and ears open. We are making sure that we are not out of the bandwagon, that we understand what is happening in that nation. So anything that evolves there, we will be on board, and we will make sure that our national interests are not compromised. And let me tell you, the Afghan nation as such, the people as such, have a lot of respect and regard for Indians. And to that extent, they too themselves would not want India to be left out. So I think our own security interests will get considered. When we talk of maintenance, that issue that came about maintenance and other issues, yes, we are now looking at joint maintenance. And we are, in fact, I didn't spell out what we are finally going to have in as far as integration is concerned. We are also looking at an integrated logistic command coming up in the long term, so that the resources of the three services, the maintenance happens in the right direction, integrated manner. We have already created 3 joint logistic nodes to begin with as a test bed. We have a joint logistic node in Mumbai where the Navy has taken control. All the logistic issues of Mumbai are now being looked after by the Navy, right from maintenance to FOL supply to rations to hiring of CSTs to anything that happens is being done by the Navy. Similarly, we have a joint logistic node which has happened in Guwahati as a test bed. And the third one has come up at Chennai, which is looking after the Port Blair issues. So to begin with, we have started joint logistics in these 3 stations. And depending on the success of this, we will make sure that it happens pan India, wherever we have 2 or 3 services operating simultaneously. So this is how we are making forward. And finally, we'll have a joint logistic command so that the logistic issues get integrated. Today, what we are doing is, for example, FOL. Now, with this year, in fact, last year, 2020, we started ensuring that FOL contracts that we sign with the oil companies are done in an integrated manner. For example, the ATF, the largest user of ATF is the Air Force. So the entire ATF contract with the oil company is now being done by the Air Force. Diesel is done by the Army. The ships utilize a special kind of diesel, so of course that you can't step in. So the Navy does it. Then there are a large number of oils and lubricants that we have to use. These are all being contracted together. And what is the advantage we are getting from that? We are getting a huge discount from these oil companies. Let me tell you that the kind of discount we were getting earlier, for example, on diesel, we were getting a discount from the oil companies, which was to the tune of just about 200 to 300 rupees per ton. This year, we have been able to get a discount of 5,000 liters per kiloton or kiloliter. This is the kind of discount. Now, when you look at the compounding the discount, how much does it totally come to? It comes to 600 crores per annum. So by doing this kind of joint logistics, joint everything, now we are looking at joint maintenance. So the helicopter maintenance, for example, the ALH of the Army and Air Force, we are looking at one place. The Air Force has now got the Apaches. The Army is going to get the Apaches. The logistic support will be in one hub. That is what we are looking at. So that we do not have too many logistic hubs coming up for different services. That is how we are going to ensure that you have joint logistic. At the same time, what we are trying to ensure is that whatever equipment is manufactured by a foreign OEM, even if we are getting Sukhois which are being manufactured elsewhere or the Rafale is being manufactured elsewhere, we are now trying to insist on these OEMs that the support system exists in our country, must be developed in our country. So now the contract system that we are doing, in that the first thing we talk about is what about the maintenance contract and where will it be? Today, we have to send all our systems to OEMs, to the countries back there, which means there is large amount of downtime. There is cost on transportation of these assets back to that country. So we are now going to ensure that in our future contracting systems, the maintenance hub for large equipment is established within the country. And that is what the Atmanirbhar Bharat is all about. Next thing, of course, came out Indianization. We are very serious about Indianization. We have now put some items which have been put on the positive indigenization list with years which have been spelled out against each. This implies that this equipment or a subsystem or an ammunition or a weapon system which has been put on the positive indigenization list cannot be imported by any service from abroad. It will have to be manufactured in India. And that is only in case we have an emergency like the one we have now with on the northern front. If there's an emergency and then if you have to your equipment, we will go back to the government, take special sanction to carry out some emergency purchases. Otherwise, there'll be a ban on import of such items which have been put on the positive indigenization list. This is what is encouraging the Indian industry to move forward. Because unless they know that there are going to be numbers on which they will have to sustain their industry, they are not going to come forward. We are going in for a large amount of ammunition being manufactured in India, and we are giving them a 10-year requirement. That means our requirement will be once we have given a contract to a particular company for manufacturing, for example, our tank ammunition, then the orders will be placed on that company, whoever gets the L1 tender, for 10 years. And we have worked out a 10 years requirement because we do have requirement for training ammunition. And when we are going to develop these things inside the country, we are also asking them to produce some training ammunition with lesser explosive content, which is cheaper than the original ammunition. So all that is being worked out, and I think that is the way forward. We are making good headway in that. Now, when we came to the, the National Maritime to begin with, we have now started with the fusion center. We have a fusion center which has been created in Gurgaon, in which the entire merchant shipping, as of now, only the merchant shipping which is moving through the Indian Ocean region, every information is available to you in the National Maritime Center. We have invited countries from abroad, representatives from abroad, who are participating with us. We have a French national there. We're soon having Bangladeshis coming in there. We have Vietnamese, Indonesians coming in there. The Americans have evinced interest because they understand the relevance of the Indian Ocean region. So we are doing that. And gradually we will also bring into this the grey shipping. That is the navies of the world. How are they operating and who's where? So all this information will be available. Along with that, we were looking at an NMDA, for the Navy. But finally, we have decided to revive the NMC, as Dr. Satish Chandra brought out. The NMC is moving at a very fast pace. It's in the final stages. And I think it only requires now the nod of the CCS before it will be through. I think by this year, sometime by the middle of this year, the NMC will become a reality. We are working toward this. The organization structure has already been worked out, and how it is going to function, and with all agencies will work under this. Interministerial consultations have happened, and you will see NMC becoming a reality. You said it was something which didn't happen. It has happened. Talking about the DIA, now the JIC has become an effective mechanism, and the DIA has integrated the resources of the three nations. But what we are doing is, each individual service has its own intelligence agencies also. They are looking at tactical intelligence. So the tactical intelligence is being looked at by the respective service. The strategic intelligence that is of more relevance, where you have to interact with the other countries with whom you have got intelligence sharing mechanisms or info sharing mechanism, that issue is being looked at by the DIA. So what we have done is, after the creation of the CDS, we have defined very clearly what the DIA will be responsible for and what the intelligence agencies of the respective services will be responsible for. So there's a very clear dividing line between them, yet the integration is also happening. And the JIC ultimately is providing all the intelligence. With Dr. Arvind Gupta here, I think I don't have to speak. He will talk for it and say how the intelligence agencies have integrated, how the NTRO, not only the intelligence which is human intelligence or electronic intelligence, we are also looking at large amount of technical intelligence coming in. Satellite imagery is being used in a coordinated manner. So I think we have moved forward way beyond what we had contemplated earlier, and I think DIA to that extent has become a very effective agency. Yeah, as far as cyber security is concerned, as of now, we are looking at defensive cyber. The other issue that you talked of, I think we will rather keep silent on that, but be rest assured, we wouldn't like to talk about it, but we are somewhere there.
Thank you very much, General Rawat. We are over time, although there are a few questions which we could not discuss. But certainly we have been enlightened by your presentation, and you have updated many of us. And I think several new initiatives that have been taken, they will begin to show their results soon. That is our hope. And what is, I think, a takeaway for me is that there were, over the last 20 years, all kinds of sessions, and they were floating around, whether it was think tanks or different services, etc. But with finally the appointment of the CDS, now you're able to pull them together and see what is acceptable, what can be done, and also take it through the system, and also make all the arrangements for their implementation. So, but I think, as you said, it's a dynamic environment, and there is still asymmetry, perceived asymmetry between India and China in so many areas, and particularly on the technology side, I think the pace will have to be far, far quicker. And it is not just the armed forces, but as you also said, it's a whole of government, I would say even whole of society approach that would be required. And that's why I think the importance of our education system, the industry, other organizations in the civil-military fusion is become very important. So thank you very much for spending this very invigorating time, almost 1.5 hours with us. And we hope that you will visit us once again in the near future, and we can carry on these discussions, because these are never-ending discussions, some new issues also. So I want to thank all the veterans who have been here of the strategic community, former chiefs, ambassadors, heads of several institutions who have dealt with these issues in various capacities. They know the lie of the land extremely well, and I'm sure they would have many views about what you have just said. overall, I think we feel quite reassured. So thank you very much, everyone, for being with us, and special thanks to and applause to the CDS. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And as far as we in CDS are concerned, sir, we are welcome to any suggestions that you feel will help us move forward in whatever we are doing, whether it is integrating the services, whether it is looking at technology infusion, whether it is looking at our organization structures, how we need to be prepared and battle ready for the future. We would be welcome. Anything that you have, sir, you can just pen down your thoughts and send it to us, or we would be very happy to meet you individually, because any amount of two-way conversation is always better than just remaining confined within ourselves, because people who have, veterans who have risen in stature and service have a lot of experience, and if we can gain from the experience, we would rather take advantage of that. Thank you very much indeed for having given me this opportunity, and thank you all for this participation and a very lively discussion that we've had. I have also gathered a lot of thoughts from you, which we will carry forward in whatever way we can. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, and Jai Hind. Thank you so much.
नमस्कार, मैं हूं मानक गुप्ता। अगर आपको हमारा ये वीडियो पसंद आया हो तो इसे लाइक और शेयर जरूर करें, और हां, हमें सब्सक्राइब और फॉलो करना ना भूलें, ताकि आप देश और दुनिया की कोई खबर मिस ना करें। तो जुड़े रहिए हमारे साथ और देखते रहिए News 24।